The warehouse hummed with mechanical precision at 7:15 on a Tuesday morning, fluorescent lights casting long shadows between towering shelves that stretched toward the concrete ceiling like steel forests. Marcus Chen moved through the narrow aisles with deliberate steps, his scanner beeping softly as he located each item on his pick list. While other workers rushed past him, their carts rattling and voices echoing in urgent bursts, Marcus maintained his steady rhythm, checking each product code twice before placing it carefully in his designated bin. His weathered hands, still bearing the faint calluses from years of gripping presentation clickers and conference room pens, now guided industrial scanners with the same methodical attention he once brought to quarterly reports. The red vest hung loose on his frame, a size too large because the company had run out of mediums on his first day 6 months ago. He had never asked for a replacement. The morning rush was always the same symphony of efficiency and chaos. Forklifts beeped their warnings as they navigated the concrete arteries between sections, their operators calling out good-natured challenges to the pickers about daily quotas. Marcus had learned to read the warehouse like a complex system, understanding how each worker's rhythm affected the whole, how the morning shift's pace would ripple through the afternoon deliveries and evening restocking. He paused at shelf B47, scanning the barcode on a box of industrial cleaning supplies. The scanner hesitated, then beeped its rejection. Marcus examined the label more closely, noting the slight smudge that had confused the device. He cleaned it with his sleeve and tried again. This time the scanner accepted it with a satisfied chirp. Behind him, Jake Morrison pushed his cart at nearly double speed, his sneakers squeaking against the polished concrete as he pivoted around corners. Jake had been here 3 years and took pride in being the fastest picker on the morning shift. He glanced at Marcus with a mixture of pity and impatience as he passed. The warehouse management system tracked everything with digital precision. Steps taken, items picked per hour, accuracy rates, break times down to the minute. Marcus knew his numbers put him in the bottom third for speed, but his accuracy rate remained perfect. Not a single item returned, not one customer complaint traced back to his picks. In his previous life, he would have called it operational excellence. Here, it was just being slow. At 7:45, Marcus reached the end of aisle C, where the pharmaceutical supplies were stored behind locked caging. He waited for Janet Rodriguez, the warehouse manager, to arrive with her keys. Janet was a compact woman with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her company shirt pressed despite the early hour. She had worked her way up from the loading dock over 12 years, earning respect through fairness and an uncanny ability to spot problems before they became crises. "Good morning, Marcus," she said, unlocking the cage with efficient movements. "How's Emma doing with her school project?" "She's building a model of the solar system," Marcus replied, his voice carrying the quiet pride that always appeared when he spoke of his daughter. "She's determined to make Saturn's rings from actual metal wire instead of the cardboard the instructions suggest." Janet smiled as she held the gate open for him. "Sounds like she gets her attention to detail from her father." Marcus selected the prescription bottles from the secured shelving, each one requiring individual scanning and verification. The process couldn't be rushed, and he was grateful for work that valued accuracy over speed, even if the daily metric suggested otherwise. Each bottle represented someone's health, someone's grandfather's heart medication or a child's asthma inhaler. The weight of that responsibility felt familiar, though different from the corporate decisions that had once kept him awake at night. As he worked, Marcus's mind drifted to the morning routine that had brought him here. Emma had been unusually quiet over breakfast, picking at her cereal while reviewing her math homework one final time. She worried about getting problems wrong, a trait that reminded him painfully of himself. He had helped her check her work, his fingers remembering the feel of his old calculator as he guided her through the multiplication tables. The breakfast dishes were still in the sink when he left, a small compromise he made each morning. Emma would wash them before school, part of the careful choreography of their shared responsibilities. She never complained, though he knew she noticed the difference between their cramped apartment and the suburban house they had lived in before. At 8:30, Marcus pushed his completed cart toward the shipping area, where boxes would be sorted and loaded onto delivery trucks. The morning sun streamed through the high windows, warming the concrete floor and creating patterns of light that shifted with the moving clouds outside. He had learned to appreciate these small moments of beauty in the industrial landscape, the way efficiency could have its own aesthetic when observed with patience. The shipping supervisor, Carlos, nodded approvingly as Marcus approached. "Your picks are always clean, man," he said, scanning the items with practiced speed. "Makes my job easier when I don't have to double-check everything." Marcus accepted the compliment with a quiet nod, understanding that in this environment, reliability was its own form of excellence. He had spent years chasing innovation and disruption in boardrooms, but there was something deeply satisfying about work that could be completed with integrity each day. As he returned to the picker staging area for his next assignment, Marcus noticed a new face among the supervisors. A man in his 50s with silver hair and expensive-looking boots stood near the manager's office, clipboard in hand, watching the morning operations with intense focus. His jeans were too new, creased from the package, and his company shirt still had the fold lines from being freshly laundered. Everything about him suggested someone trying to blend in while fundamentally not belonging. The man's eyes tracked the movement of workers with the calculating gaze of someone accustomed to measuring performance from a distance. When his attention settled on Marcus, there was something in his expression that suggested judgment already forming, conclusions being drawn from incomplete data. Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the same sensation he had experienced in his final months at Davidson and Associates when the efficiency consultants had arrived with their stopwatches and clipboards. He pushed the feeling aside, focusing instead on the simple task ahead of him. Pick the items, scan the codes, load the cart, repeat. Work that was honest and necessary, work that fed his daughter and kept their small apartment warm. The warehouse around him continued its productive hum, dozens of workers contributing to the complex ballet of modern logistics. Somewhere in the distance, a radio played softly, mixing with the sounds of machinery and conversation. Marcus pulled his next pick list from the printer, noting the familiar comfort of routine about to begin again. He did not yet know that the man with the expensive boots was about to change everything, that the careful equilibrium he had built over 6 months was about to be tested in ways that would force him to choose between invisibility and truth. For now, there was only the next aisle, the next item, the next small act of precision in a world that rarely noticed the difference between good enough and perfect. Where in the world are you watching from right now? What time is it where you are as this story unfolds? We would love to know you're there with us on this journey. Marcus Chen walked toward aisle D, unaware that his quiet dedication was about to collide with ambition, that his methodical approach would soon be challenged by someone who measured worth in numbers rather than character, and that the skills he had learned to hide would soon be the only tools capable of saving not just his job, but his dignity. The man with the expensive boots introduced himself as Rick Stevens, temporary supervisor brought in to evaluate operational efficiency. His handshake was firm, practiced, the kind that suggested boardroom familiarity despite the warehouse setting. He carried himself with the subtle authority of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room, even when that room was filled with industrial shelving and the constant hum of machinery. Marcus had seen this type before, during his years at Davidson and Associates. Management consultants who arrived with predetermined solutions, efficiency experts who measured human productivity like machine output. Rick's eyes held that same calculating intensity, scanning the warehouse floor as if it were a spreadsheet requiring optimization. Within his first hour, Rick had positioned himself at the central monitoring station, where computer screens displayed real-time picker performance metrics. Names appeared in colored columns, green for exceeding quotas, yellow for meeting standards, red for falling behind. Marcus's name consistently appeared in the yellow zone, occasionally dipping toward red during particularly complex picks that required extra verification. "I'm seeing some inconsistencies in productivity levels," Rick announced to Janet Rodriguez, his voice carrying across the nearby work area. "This Marcus Chen, for instance. His numbers are consistently below average. What's the issue there?" Janet glanced at the screen, then toward the pharmaceutical section where Marcus was carefully handling controlled substances. "Marcus has the highest accuracy rate in the building," she replied evenly. "0 returns, 0 complaints. He handles our most sensitive picks because he's completely reliable. Rick's expression suggested this explanation was insufficient. Accuracy doesn't matter if you can't meet basic speed requirements, he said, making notes on his clipboard. The industry standard is 15 picks per hour minimum. He's averaging 11. The conversation carried clearly in the warehouse's acoustic environment, and Marcus felt the familiar weight of being discussed rather than consulted. He continued his work, scanning medicine bottles with the same methodical precision, but awareness of Rick's scrutiny added tension to movements that had become natural over 6 months. During the 10:15 break, Rick approached Marcus directly. The other workers had gathered near the vending machines, their conversations a mixture of work gossip and weekend plans. Marcus sat alone at a corner table, reviewing his daughter's math homework that she had tucked into his lunch bag with a note that read, "Check my work, Daddy. I want to make sure it's perfect." Marcus Chen, right? Rick said, settling into the opposite chair without invitation. "I've been reviewing your performance metrics." Marcus looked up from Emma's carefully written multiplication problems, his expression neutral. "Yes, sir. Your productivity numbers are concerning," Rick continued, consulting his clipboard. "The company needs to see improvement in output rates. Speed is crucial in this business. We can't afford to have pickers who can't keep up with basic quotas." "I understand the importance of efficiency," Marcus replied quietly. "I focus on accuracy to ensure customer satisfaction and minimize costly returns." Rick's smile was thin, professional. "That's admirable, but accuracy without speed is just expensive perfectionism. I need to see your pick rate increase by at least 20% over the next 2 weeks, or we'll need to discuss alternative arrangements." The phrase, alternative arrangements, hung in the air between them, its meaning clear despite the corporate euphemism. Marcus nodded, returning his attention to Emma's homework. The numbers on her paper seemed to blur slightly as he calculated what a 20% increase would mean, how it would require abandoning the careful verification process that had become second nature. Rick stood, satisfied that his message had been delivered. "I'm sure you'll find a way to work more efficiently," he said. "Everyone can improve with the right motivation." After Rick walked away, Marcus completed checking Emma's math problems, finding them all correct. Her handwriting was neat, her work methodical and thorough. She had inherited his attention to detail, his belief that things worth doing were worth doing well. He wondered what lessons his workplace struggles might teach her about the value of precision in a world that increasingly rewarded speed over substance. The afternoon brought a new intensity to Marcus's work. He found himself constantly aware of Rick's presence, the way the temporary supervisor would appear at the end of aisles, timing pick sequences with a stopwatch app on his phone. The psychological pressure was familiar from his corporate days, when efficiency consultants had measured everything from bathroom breaks to lunch duration. Marcus attempted to increase his speed while maintaining accuracy, but the pharmaceutical picks couldn't be rushed safely. Each controlled substance required specific handling protocols, verification procedures that existed for legal compliance as much as customer safety. He managed to improve his rate slightly, but nowhere near the 20% increase Rick had demanded. At 3:30, as Marcus completed a complex pick involving multiple prescription transfers, Rick appeared beside him with the stopwatch running. "That took you 4 minutes and 37 seconds, he said. "Industry standard for that pick should be 2 minutes maximum." "The medications require careful verification," Marcus explained, his voice remaining calm despite the growing frustration. "A mistake with controlled substances could result in serious consequences." Rick's expression hardened. Everyone else manages to meet standards while following the same protocols. The problem isn't the procedures, it's the execution. You need to work faster, or you won't be working here at all. The ultimatum was delivered with casual certainty, as if Marcus's employment were simply another efficiency metric to be optimized. Rick walked away, leaving Marcus alone among the pharmaceutical shelves, surrounded by the careful order he had helped maintain for 6 months. Marcus returned to his work, but something had shifted. The warehouse that had felt like refuge now carried the weight of scrutiny, the simple satisfaction of reliable work complicated by arbitrary demands for speed. He thought of Emma, waiting for him at home, trusting that his steady employment would continue providing the stability she needed. The afternoon wore on, each pick now shadowed by the awareness of being measured, evaluated, found wanting by standards that seemed to value motion over meaning. Marcus maintained his methodical approach, but the joy had been drained from the work, replaced by the familiar anxiety of a job under threat. As his shift ended, Marcus gathered his belongings, including Emma's completed homework with his proud check marks beside each correct answer. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new pressures to choose between speed and accuracy. He walked toward the exit, unaware that his quiet dignity in the face of unreasonable demands was about to become the foundation for something far more significant than improved productivity metrics. The apartment door closed behind Marcus with a soft click that echoed in the narrow hallway. The building was older, its walls thin enough that he could hear Mrs. Patterson's television through the shared wall and the distant sound of children playing in the courtyard below. He hung his work vest on the hook beside the door, next to Emma's purple backpack and the lightweight jacket she wore on cooler mornings. Emma looked up from the kitchen table where she had spread her school supplies across the scratched surface, her dark hair falling forward as she concentrated on cutting precise circles from construction paper. Her tongue peeked out slightly at the corner of her mouth, a habit she had inherited from him during moments of intense focus. "How was work today, Daddy?" she asked, not looking up from her careful cutting. "Did you help people get their medicines?" Marcus settled into the chair across from her, noting how she had arranged her project materials with the same methodical organization he brought to warehouse picking. "Yes, sweetheart. I made sure everything was packed correctly so people could get what they need." Emma nodded solemnly, understanding even at 8 years old that her father's work was important beyond the simple mechanics of moving boxes. She held up a yellow circle, examining its edges for imperfections. "This is going to be the sun for my solar system model. Mrs. Garcia says it needs to be the biggest planet, but I told her the sun isn't a planet at all." Marcus smiled, recognizing the gentle correction that came from Emma's careful attention to accuracy. "You're absolutely right. The sun is a star, and it's much bigger than any of the planets." "I know," she said with quiet confidence. "I looked it up in 3 different books to make sure." The pride in her voice reminded Marcus of his own approach to verification, the way he double-checked pharmaceutical codes not because he doubted his initial reading, but because accuracy mattered more than speed. Emma had absorbed this philosophy naturally, applying it to school projects with the same dedication he brought to his work. Marcus opened the refrigerator, mentally cataloging its contents as he planned dinner. 2 chicken breasts, enough pasta for several meals, vegetables that would need to be used within the next few days. His budgeting had become precise over the past 6 months, every grocery purchase calculated to maximize nutrition while minimizing expense. The corporate salary was gone, but they were managing. The apartment itself told the story of careful downsizing. The furniture was mostly second-hand, chosen for durability rather than style. Emma's bedroom contained the few items they had prioritized during the move, her bookshelf filled with carefully selected volumes, her desk positioned near the window for optimal homework lighting, and the small telescope he had given her for her 7th birthday. While Marcus prepared dinner, Emma continued working on her project, occasionally asking questions about planetary distances and orbital mechanics. Her curiosity was boundless, her questions often requiring him to research answers he didn't immediately know. These moments reminded him of the intellectual engagement he had once found in corporate problem-solving, the satisfaction of analyzing complex systems and finding elegant solutions. The chicken sizzled in the pan as Marcus chopped vegetables with practiced efficiency. His knife skills had improved dramatically since taking on most of the cooking responsibilities, another adaptation to their changed circumstances. Emma set aside her project materials and began setting the table, her movements automatic after months of established routine. "Daddy," she said as they sat down to eat, "Jenny's mom picks her up from school in a big car with leather seats. She says her mom works in an office building with elevators and glass walls. Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came when Emma noticed the differences between their life and those of her classmates. He had hoped that the transition would be easier for her, that 8 years old was young enough to adapt without dwelling on what had been lost. Different families have different kinds of work, he said carefully. What matters is that we take care of each other and do our jobs well, whatever they are. Emma nodded, twirling pasta around her fork with the same concentration she brought to her school projects. I think your job is important, she said. When people are sick, they need their medicines to be right. You make sure they get the right ones. Her simple understanding of his work's value provided a comfort that efficiency metrics and productivity quotas could never match. Marcus reached across to squeeze her hand gently, grateful for her perspective that measured worth in human terms rather than corporate benchmarks. After dinner, they worked together on homework and project preparation. Emma practiced her multiplication tables while Marcus reviewed supply chain logistics textbooks he had checked out from the library, keeping his knowledge current even though he couldn't use it openly at work. The books reminded him of capabilities that remained hidden, skills that could solve problems far beyond simple warehouse picking. At 8:30, Emma brushed her teeth and changed into pajamas decorated with small planets and stars. Marcus read to her from a chapter book about young scientists, her head resting against his shoulder as they shared the adventure of discovery and problem-solving. These quiet moments anchored his days, providing purpose that transcended workplace politics and efficiency demands. Before turning off her bedroom light, Emma looked up at him with serious eyes. "Daddy, are you happy at work?" The question caught him off guard with its directness. Emma had always been perceptive, able to sense emotions that adults tried to hide. He considered how to answer honestly without burdening her with concerns beyond her control. "Work can be challenging sometimes," he said, smoothing her hair back from her forehead. "But I'm grateful to have a job that helps me take care of you. That makes me happy." Emma nodded, apparently satisfied with this explanation. "I love you, Daddy." "I love you too, sweetheart. Sleep well." Marcus returned to the kitchen, washing dishes while his mind processed the day's events. Rick's ultimatum hung over tomorrow's work like a storm cloud, threatening the stability he had worked so hard to establish. The apartment around him represented more than downsized living, it was proof that they could adapt, survive, even find contentment in simpler circumstances. He dried the last plate and placed it in the cabinet, noting how Emma had arranged the other dishes with careful attention to size and function. Her organizational skills reminded him daily that his approach to work, life, and problem-solving had been passed down to the next generation. The evening news played softly on their small television, stories of corporate mergers and economic indicators that once would have captured his full attention. Now they seemed distant, relevant to a world he had left behind. His focus had narrowed to immediate concerns: Emma's education, their monthly budget, maintaining employment in a job that valued speed over substance. Marcus turned off the television and prepared for bed, setting his alarm for another early morning at the warehouse. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new pressure to compromise his standards for the sake of arbitrary productivity goals. But tonight, in the quiet apartment where his daughter slept peacefully, he felt the satisfaction of work completed with integrity and love expressed through consistent presence. The warehouse efficiency demands would be waiting in the morning, but so would the opportunity to continue providing for Emma with dignity and care. Marcus fell asleep thinking not of pick rates or performance metrics, but of yellow construction paper sons and the careful precision of a daughter who understood that accuracy mattered more than speed. The warehouse felt different the next morning, charged with an undercurrent of tension that Marcus recognized from his corporate days when restructuring rumors began circulating through the halls. Rick had arrived even earlier than usual, positioning himself at the monitoring station with the intensity of someone conducting a military operation rather than observing warehouse efficiency. Marcus clocked in at precisely 7 o'clock, noting how several coworkers avoided eye contact as they collected their first pick lists. Word had spread about Rick's demands for increased productivity, and the informal camaraderie that usually characterized the morning shift had been replaced by focused, almost anxious energy. Jake Morrison pushed past Marcus toward the electronics section, his cartwheels spinning as he took the corner at dangerous speed. Even Jake, typically confident in his position as the fastest picker, seemed affected by Rick's presence. His movements had become more frantic, less controlled, as if speed alone could provide protection from unwanted scrutiny. Marcus pulled his first assignment from the printer, noting the pharmaceutical picks that would require his usual careful attention. The controlled substances couldn't be rushed regardless of Rick's demands, but he wondered if he could find small efficiencies elsewhere without compromising his standards. As he moved toward the pharmaceutical cage, Marcus passed Rick's monitoring station. The temporary supervisor was studying performance metrics on multiple screens, his expensive pen moving across a legal pad as he made notes. When he looked up and saw Marcus approaching, his expression hardened with the focus of a predator who had identified vulnerable prey. "Chen," Rick called out, his voice carrying authority that stopped Marcus mid-stride. "I want to see significant improvement in your numbers today. No excuses about procedures or accuracy. Results are what matter." Marcus nodded quietly, understanding that any response would be interpreted as resistance. He had learned in his corporate years that some supervisors preferred compliance to conversation, performance to explanations. Rick was clearly that type of manager, someone who measured success in metrics rather than outcomes. The pharmaceutical cage unlocked with Janet's arrival, but even her usual warmth seemed subdued. She handed Marcus the keys without their typical morning conversation, her glance toward Rick's station suggesting she was also feeling the pressure of increased oversight. Marcus began his picks with the same methodical approach, but he attempted to streamline his movements where possible. He organized his cart more efficiently, planned his route through the cage to minimize steps, and reduced his verification time slightly while still maintaining complete accuracy. Small improvements that respected both safety requirements and Rick's demand for speed. At 9:15, Rick appeared at the pharmaceutical section with his stopwatch, positioning himself where Marcus could see the device clearly. The psychological pressure was intentional, designed to create anxiety that would either force faster performance or provide justification for termination. "That last pick took you 3 minutes and 42 seconds, Rick announced. "Industry standard is 2 minutes 30 seconds maximum." Marcus continued working, scanning the next medication carefully before responding. This particular combination requires additional verification due to interaction warnings. Patient safety protocols mandate the extra time. Rick's smile was cold, professional. Patient safety is important, but so is operational efficiency. Other facilities manage both without the delays you're creating. The accusation stung because Marcus knew it was partially true. Larger operations with automated systems could achieve faster speeds while maintaining safety. But those facilities also had higher error rates, more returns, and less personal accountability. The trade-offs were invisible in productivity metrics but significant in real-world outcomes. Throughout the morning, Rick continued his surveillance, appearing randomly to time various picks and make notes on his clipboard. The other workers began giving Marcus sympathetic glances, understanding that he had become the focus of unwanted attention that could easily shift to any of them. During the 10:15 break, Marcus sat alone again, reviewing Emma's latest homework assignment. She had written a short essay about her father's work, describing how he helped sick people get their medicine safely. Her words carried pride and understanding that made Rick's criticism feel even more unfair. Jake Morrison approached Marcus's table, glancing nervously toward Rick's station before sitting down. "Dude, that guy is intense," he said quietly. "He's been asking questions about everyone's performance, but he seems really focused on you." Marcus appreciated Jake's concern despite their different approaches to the work. "I'm trying to improve my speed without compromising quality," he replied. "It's challenging with the pharmaceutical picks." Jake nodded, understanding the complexity of controlled substance handling. "Maybe you could ask for different assignments temporarily? Work the general merchandise sections where you can move faster?" The suggestion was practical, but Marcus knew it wouldn't solve the underlying problem. Rick had identified him as a performance issue, and changing assignments would only delay the inevitable confrontation. Better to face the challenge directly and find ways to excel within his current responsibilities. The afternoon brought escalated pressure as Rick implemented a new monitoring system. He positioned himself at the end of each aisle Marcus worked, timing every pick and making visible notes about delays. The constant observation created exactly the kind of stress that led to mistakes, turning Rick's prediction of poor performance into a self-fulfilling prophecy. At 2:30, Marcus reached for a high shelf containing respiratory medications, taking extra time to ensure he selected the correct inhaler from several similar packages. Rick's stopwatch was running, the digital display visible in his peripheral vision as he verified the medication code twice before scanning. 4 minutes and 15 seconds for a simple pick, Rick announced loudly enough for nearby workers to hear. This is exactly the kind of inefficiency that's costing the company money. The public criticism was designed to humiliate, to break down Marcus's confidence and force either dramatic improvement or resignation. Marcus felt the familiar burn of professional judgment rendered without understanding context or complexity. That evening, Marcus arrived home to find Emma working on her solar system project with renewed intensity. She had constructed Saturn's rings from thin metal wire, exactly as she had planned, creating a delicate structure that captured light beautifully when rotated. "It's perfect," Marcus said, genuinely impressed by her craftsmanship and attention to detail. Emma beamed with pride, then grew serious. "Daddy, you seem worried. Is everything okay at work?" Marcus considered how much to share with her, balancing honesty with protection from adult concerns. "Work has some new challenges," he said carefully. "But I'm handling them the best way I know how." Emma nodded, satisfied with his explanation. "You always figure things out," she said with complete confidence. "You're the smartest daddy in the world." Her faith in him provided strength that productivity metrics and supervisor criticism couldn't diminish. Marcus helped her position Saturn in the correct orbital distance from her wire sun, marveling at how her careful attention to accuracy had created something both beautiful and scientifically precise. As they worked together on the project, Marcus realized that Rick's pressure was forcing him toward a decision he had been avoiding for months. He could continue hiding his capabilities, accepting criticism for perceived slowness, or he could find ways to demonstrate his true value without completely revealing his background. The warehouse challenges would continue tomorrow, but tonight he focused on Emma's pride in work done carefully and correctly. Her approach to the solar system project reminded him that excellence was its own reward, regardless of whether others recognized or appreciated the effort involved. The morning of Marcus's third day under Rick's intense scrutiny began with an announcement that changed the warehouse dynamic completely. Rick had called an impromptu meeting at 7:30, gathering all the morning shift workers near the central monitoring station where performance metrics glowed on multiple screens like a digital scoreboard of human worth. Marcus stood with the other pickers, noting how the group had unconsciously arranged itself with the fastest workers toward the front and those struggling with productivity toward the back. He found himself in the middle, neither celebrated nor completely dismissed, occupying the uncomfortable space of workers who performed adequately but not exceptionally. Rick stood before them with the confidence of someone accustomed to commanding attention, his clipboard held like a weapon of evaluation. His expensive boots were already showing scuff marks from 3 days on the warehouse floor, but his authority remained undiminished by the industrial environment. "I've been observing operations for several days now," Rick began, his voice carrying clearly in the vast space. "What I've seen is a significant gap between our best performers and those who are holding back overall efficiency." He gestured toward the screens displaying pick rates, accuracy percentages, and productivity rankings. The names appeared in stark columns, green for excellent, yellow for acceptable, red for improvement needed. Marcus's name flickered between yellow and red, depending on which metrics were being calculated. "Some of you understand that speed and efficiency are essential to staying competitive," Rick continued. "Others seem to think that this is a place where you can work at whatever pace feels comfortable." His eyes found Marcus in the crowd, holding his gaze for several seconds before moving on. The message was clear without being explicitly stated. Marcus felt the weight of public scrutiny, the familiar sensation of being made an example for others. Jake Morrison shifted uncomfortably beside Marcus, his usual confidence shaken by the formal nature of Rick's criticism. Even Janet Rodriguez looked tense, her authority as warehouse manager seemingly diminished by Rick's temporary but decisive oversight. "I want to see immediate improvement from everyone in the red zone," Rick announced. "Consider this your official notice that current performance levels are unacceptable. We're not running a charity here. This is a business that requires results." The meeting dispersed with subdued energy, workers moving toward their assignments with the knowledge that every movement was being evaluated. Marcus collected his first pick list, noting that he had been assigned to the general merchandise section rather than his usual pharmaceutical picks. The change felt like both an opportunity and a warning. As Marcus began working the new section, he realized that Rick had strategically moved him to an area where speed could be more easily increased without the safety protocols that governed controlled substances. The electronics and household goods could be picked quickly, their verification requirements minimal compared to prescription medications. Marcus attempted to embrace the faster pace, organizing his cart efficiently and planning routes that minimized travel time between picks. His years of logistics consulting had taught him about workflow optimization, and he began applying those principles subconsciously even as he tried to maintain his humble warehouse worker persona. At 10:15, during the morning break, Rick approached Marcus directly in front of the other workers. The timing was deliberate, designed to create maximum psychological impact through public confrontation. "Chen, I need to see dramatic improvement in your numbers," Rick said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Your current pace is unacceptable for any distribution center that wants to remain competitive." Marcus felt the eyes of his co-workers on him, some sympathetic, others relieved that they weren't the focus of Rick's criticism. The public nature of the confrontation was designed to humiliate, to break down resistance through embarrassment rather than private consultation. "I understand your concerns," Marcus replied quietly, his voice carrying the dignity that had sustained him through corporate downsizing and personal setbacks. "I'm working to improve my efficiency while maintaining accuracy standards." "Accuracy doesn't matter if you can't meet basic productivity requirements," Rick shot back. "Every minute you waste costs the company money." Other workers managed to be both fast and accurate. "The problem isn't the job, it's the worker." The harsh assessment hung in the air like a challenge, drawing uncomfortable glances from the assembled workers. Marcus absorbed the criticism without visible reaction, though inside he felt the familiar burn of professional judgment rendered without understanding or context. Jake Morrison started to speak up in Marcus's defense, but Marcus caught his eye and shook his head slightly. No good could come from other workers involving themselves in management conflicts. Better to face the challenge alone than to create additional problems for colleagues who needed their jobs as much as he did. "I'll continue working to meet your expectations," Marcus said simply, refusing to be drawn into an argument that could only escalate the conflict. Rick seemed frustrated by Marcus's calm response, as if he had expected anger or defensive explanations that would justify further criticism. Instead, Marcus's quiet dignity made Rick's harsh treatment appear unnecessarily cruel to the observing workers. The afternoon brought renewed pressure as Rick positioned himself to observe Marcus's picks in the general merchandise section. The constant surveillance created exactly the kind of stress that led to errors, forcing Marcus to work even more carefully to avoid mistakes that would provide additional ammunition for criticism. At 2:45, Marcus was selecting computer accessories from a high shelf when his scanner malfunctioned, requiring him to manually enter the product code. The delay was minimal, but Rick's stopwatch was running, timing the pick with visible impatience. "Equipment problems," Marcus explained as he completed the manual entry. "The scanner wouldn't read the barcode properly." Rick's expression suggested he viewed the technical difficulty as an excuse rather than a legitimate delay. "Equipment problems happen to everyone," he said. "Good workers adapt quickly instead of using them as reasons for poor performance." The dismissal of a genuine technical issue revealed Rick's predetermined conclusion that Marcus was simply a slow worker making excuses. No explanation would be accepted, no context considered. The judgment had been rendered based on metrics alone. As his shift ended, Marcus gathered his belongings with the knowledge that tomorrow would bring even greater pressure. Rick's public criticism had marked him clearly as a problem employee, creating a situation where dramatic improvement was necessary not just for job security but for basic workplace dignity. What part of this story resonates most with you as you listen? Have you ever faced a situation where your worth was measured only by numbers rather than the quality of your work? Share your thoughts with us. Walking toward the exit, Marcus passed the pharmaceutical section where his usual picks waited for the evening shift worker who would handle them with the same careful attention he had brought to the role. The controlled substances still required precise verification regardless of Rick's efficiency demands, but Marcus would no longer be the one ensuring their accuracy. The irony wasn't lost on him that Rick's solution to slow pharmaceutical picking was simply to assign someone else to the task rather than understanding why the careful approach was necessary. Speed had become more important than safety, productivity more valued than precision. Marcus pushed through the exit doors into the late afternoon sunlight, carrying with him the weight of public humiliation and the growing certainty that his quiet approach to workplace conflict was about to be tested in ways that would force him to choose between invisibility and truth. That evening, as Emma worked on her solar system project with characteristic precision, Marcus found his thoughts drifting to a different time when his expertise had been valued rather than questioned. The memory arrived unbidden as he watched her carefully measure the distance between Mars and Jupiter, her small ruler moving with the same methodical attention he had once brought to corporate strategy sessions. 2 years ago, Marcus had occupied a corner office on the 32nd floor of Davidson & Associates, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of the city skyline, and his days were filled with complex supply chain optimizations for Fortune 500 clients. His specialty had been identifying inefficiencies in large-scale operations, finding solutions that saved companies millions while improving customer satisfaction. The irony of his current situation wasn't lost on him. Rick was criticizing his warehouse performance using the same superficial metrics that Marcus had once taught executives to look beyond. Speed without context, productivity without quality considerations, efficiency measured in isolation from customer outcomes. His final project at Davidson & Associates had been a comprehensive analysis of a national retail chain's distribution network. Marcus had identified bottlenecks that were costing the company $12 million annually, not through slow individual performance but through systemic workflow problems that forced good workers to operate inefficiently. The presentation had been scheduled for a Thursday morning in November. Marcus had spent weeks preparing detailed recommendations, complete with implementation timelines and projected savings calculations. He had been particularly proud of a section that demonstrated how investing in worker training and better verification protocols would actually increase both speed and accuracy simultaneously. On the Tuesday before his presentation, Marcus had received a call from Emma's school. She had collapsed during recess, her breathing labored and her skin pale. The ambulance ride to the hospital had blurred into a nightmare of medical tests and worried consultations between doctors who spoke in careful, measured tones about pediatric heart conditions. Emma's diagnosis had required immediate surgery followed by weeks of careful monitoring. Marcus had taken family medical leave, camping in the hospital room on an uncomfortable reclining chair while Emma recovered with the slow patience that serious illness demands. Her small hand in his had become his entire world, corporate deadlines fading to insignificance beside the rhythm of her breathing and the steady beep of heart monitors. The surgery had been successful, but Emma's recovery had stretched beyond Marcus's available leave time. Davidson & Associates had been understanding initially, but corporate compassion had limits measured in billable hours and client expectations. His project had been reassigned to a junior consultant who lacked his experience but was available to meet deadlines. When Marcus finally returned to work, his office had been moved to a smaller space on a lower floor. His client portfolio had been redistributed, and his role had been quietly diminished to routine analyses that required competence but not expertise. The message was clear without being explicitly stated: personal circumstances, however legitimate, could not be allowed to compromise professional obligations. The final blow had come during the company's annual efficiency review. Marcus's temporary absence had been noted as a gap in productivity, his medical leave characterized as an inability to maintain consistent performance standards. The human resources manager had spoken about restructuring needs and optimal team composition, corporate euphemisms that translated to involuntary termination with minimal severance. Marcus had cleared out his office on a Friday afternoon, packing years of accumulated expertise into cardboard boxes while Emma waited in the reception area, still weak from her surgery but insisting on accompanying him. She had helped carry his nameplate and desk photos, understanding even at 7 years old that something important had ended. The job search that followed had been humbling in ways Marcus hadn't anticipated. His experience was impressive but specialized, his salary expectations shaped by years at a prestigious consulting firm. Potential employers viewed his medical leave as a liability, his current unemployment as evidence of performance problems rather than corporate restructuring. Month after month of interviews had yielded the same result: expressions of interest followed by silence, promises to be in touch that never materialized, feedback that his qualifications were excellent but not quite the right fit for their current needs. The consulting industry was small enough that word of his departure from Davidson and Associates had circulated, creating an invisible barrier to comparable positions. Emma's medical bills had continued arriving even after her complete recovery, insurance copayments and specialist fees that accumulated with mathematical precision. Their savings had dwindled month by month while Marcus maintained the fiction that new opportunities were always just around the corner, that his expertise would eventually find appropriate recognition. The warehouse job at Apex Distribution had appeared in his email like an answer to prayer, though not the answer he had hoped for. The position required no experience beyond basic literacy and physical capability. The pay was a fraction of his corporate salary, but it was steady employment with health insurance that would cover Emma's ongoing cardiac monitoring. Marcus had approached the warehouse interview with the same preparation he had once brought to client presentations, researching the company's operations and identifying ways his background could add value. But the hiring manager had been interested only in availability and reliability, viewing his corporate experience as irrelevant to the simple task of picking items from shelves. On his first day at the warehouse, Marcus had recognized the inefficiencies that his consulting expertise could easily address. Workflow bottlenecks, inventory placement problems, route optimization opportunities that could improve productivity by 20% or more. But he had also recognized that offering such insights would raise uncomfortable questions about his background and motivations. Now, watching Emma apply the same careful precision to her school project that had once characterized his corporate analyses, Marcus understood that his months of hiding expertise had been preparation for this moment. Rick's criticism forced a choice between continued invisibility and the risk of revealing capabilities that might transform not just his own situation but the entire warehouse operation. Emma looked up from her project, noting his distant expression. "Are you thinking about work again, Daddy?" Marcus smiled, returning his attention to her careful placement of planetary models. "I was thinking about how problems that seem complicated usually have simple solutions if you look at them the right way. Like when I couldn't get Jupiter's distance right until I realized I was measuring from the wrong starting point?" Emma asked. "Exactly like that," Marcus replied, recognizing in her words the essence of systems thinking that had made him successful in his previous career. Sometimes you have to step back and see the whole picture before you can fix the individual pieces. Emma nodded seriously, then returned to her project with renewed focus. Marcus watched her work, understanding that tomorrow's challenges at the warehouse would require the same patient precision she brought to measuring planetary distances, the same willingness to be thorough even when others valued speed over accuracy. The fourth day under Rick's scrutiny began with an ominous shift in warehouse atmosphere. Marcus arrived to find a formal warning notice taped to his locker, official company letterhead outlining performance deficiencies and establishing a timeline for improvement. The document used corporate language that felt familiar from his consulting days, but now the cold efficiency of human resources terminology was directed at him personally. Janet Rodriguez appeared beside him as he read the notice, her expression mixing sympathy with professional obligation. "I'm sorry about this, Marcus," she said quietly. "Rick insisted on formal documentation of performance issues. You have 2 weeks to demonstrate significant improvement or face termination." Marcus folded the notice carefully, understanding that Rick had escalated beyond daily criticism to official disciplinary action. The timeline was deliberately short, designed to create pressure that would force either dramatic change or provide justification for dismissal. What specific metrics need improvement? Marcus asked, his voice maintaining the calm professionalism that had served him well in corporate crisis situations. Janet glanced toward Rick's monitoring station before responding. Pick rate needs to increase by 25%, and you'll be evaluated daily. Rick wants to see consistent progress, not just occasional good days. The requirements were harsh but not impossible, provided Marcus was willing to abandon his careful verification process. He could pick faster by trusting initial scans rather than double-checking, by moving quickly rather than methodically. But such changes would inevitably lead to errors that could affect customer safety and company reputation. Marcus spent the morning in the general merchandise section, attempting to find balance between speed and accuracy while knowing that Rick was timing every pick with mathematical precision. The constant observation created exactly the kind of stress that led to mistakes, forcing him to work even more carefully to avoid errors that would compound his problems. At 10:30, Rick summoned Marcus to the monitoring station for what he called a progress review. The screens displayed real-time performance data, Marcus's numbers prominently featured in red columns that indicated continued failure to meet expectations. "Your improvement is marginal at best," Rick announced, consulting his clipboard with the authority of someone delivering uncontestable data. "Current pace puts you at 14 picks per hour. Industry standard requires 18 minimum for general merchandise." Marcus studied the numbers, recognizing the superficial analysis that focused on individual metrics rather than systemic efficiency. In his consulting days, he would have questioned the baseline assumptions, examined workflow constraints, and identified bottlenecks that affected overall productivity regardless of individual performance. "I'm working to increase efficiency while maintaining accuracy standards," Marcus replied. "Perhaps there are systemic improvements that could benefit overall operations rather than focusing solely on individual metrics." Rick's expression hardened at the suggestion that broader analysis might be relevant. "The problem isn't the system, Chen. It's individual workers who can't keep up with basic requirements. Don't try to deflect responsibility by suggesting operational changes beyond your pay grade." The dismissal stung because Marcus knew exactly what operational changes would improve warehouse efficiency. Inventory placement optimization, route planning algorithms, workflow redesign that would increase everyone's productivity by 15% or more. But suggesting such improvements would require revealing expertise that didn't match his humble picker position. During lunch break, Marcus sat alone reviewing the formal warning notice while eating a sandwich Emma had packed for him. Her note tucked inside read, "Have a good day, Daddy. You're the best worker in the whole world." The innocent confidence in her words provided strength that performance metrics couldn't diminish. Jake Morrison approached Marcus's table, glancing nervously toward Rick's station before sitting down. "Man, this is getting intense," he said quietly. "Rick's been asking questions about everyone's background, like he's looking for reasons to make changes." Marcus appreciated Jake's concern while recognizing the warning implicit in his words. Rick wasn't just targeting slow performance, he was conducting broader evaluation that could affect anyone who didn't meet his undefined standards. "What kind of questions?" Marcus asked, curious about Rick's investigative approach. Jake lowered his voice further. "Stuff about previous jobs, education, why people are working here instead of somewhere else. Like he thinks warehouse work should only attract people with no other options." The observation revealed Rick's fundamental misunderstanding of modern employment realities. Many warehouse workers had diverse backgrounds, choosing physical labor for various personal reasons rather than lack of alternatives. Rick's prejudice against their circumstances reflected ignorance of economic complexity and individual choice. The afternoon brought a crisis that would change everything. At 2:15, the warehouse management system crashed, leaving all electronic scanners and inventory tracking temporarily offline. Workers stood confused among the towering shelves, uncertain how to proceed without digital guidance for pick locations and verification codes. Rick appeared increasingly agitated as the technical crisis extended beyond quick resolution. His clipboard became useless without real-time data feeds, and his authority seemed diminished by problems that couldn't be solved through performance criticism or productivity demands. Janet Rodriguez worked frantically with the IT support team, but the system restoration was projected to take several hours. Meanwhile, customer orders continued arriving electronically even though fulfillment capability had been eliminated by the technical failure. Marcus watched the developing chaos with growing internal conflict. His consulting expertise included extensive experience with supply chain disruption management, crisis response protocols that could maintain operations even during system failures. He knew exactly how to organize manual processes that would allow continued picking and shipping while technical problems were resolved. But revealing such knowledge would expose his background completely, raising questions about his motivations for accepting warehouse work and potentially creating new problems with both management and co-workers. The safe choice was to remain quiet, following whatever instructions Janet provided while avoiding the scrutiny that came with offering solutions. Rick's frustration mounted as the crisis continued without resolution. He demanded updates from Janet every few minutes, clearly uncomfortable with problems that couldn't be addressed through employee criticism or efficiency mandates. His management style was revealed as effective only when systems functioned normally and workers could be held accountable for individual metrics. At 3:30, with the system still offline and customer shipments falling hours behind schedule, Marcus made his decision. He approached Janet's desk where she was coordinating with IT support, her professional calm beginning to show stress fractures under the pressure of accumulating delays. "Excuse me, Janet," Marcus said quietly. "I might have some suggestions for maintaining operations during the system outage." Janet looked up from her phone conversation, desperation making her willing to consider advice from any source. Rick stood nearby, his attention caught by Marcus's unexpected offer of assistance in areas beyond his assigned responsibilities. "What kind of suggestions?" Janet asked, her voice carrying hope mixed with skepticism. Marcus glanced at Rick, then back to Janet, understanding that his next words would irrevocably change his position in the warehouse hierarchy. "I have some experience with supply chain crisis management. There are manual processes that could allow continued operations while the technical issues are resolved." The statement hung in the air like a revelation, drawing sharp attention from both Janet and Rick. Marcus had crossed the line from humble picker to someone claiming expertise in areas that required significant education and experience. Have you ever faced a moment when staying silent felt safe, but speaking up was the right thing to do? Sometimes our greatest challenges become opportunities to show who we really are. What would you do in Marcus's situation? Rick's eyes narrowed as he processed Marcus's unexpected offer, clearly questioning how a slow warehouse picker could possess knowledge relevant to crisis management. The comfortable dynamic of supervisor and subordinate had shifted into something more complex and potentially threatening to Rick's assumed authority. Marcus stood quietly, waiting for their response while knowing that whatever happened next would determine not just his employment status but his willingness to continue hiding capabilities that could make a genuine difference in the lives of everyone around him. Janet's expression shifted from skepticism to cautious interest as she processed Marcus's unexpected offer. The warehouse chaos around them continued to escalate, with workers standing idle among the shelves while customer orders accumulated in digital limbo. Every minute of system downtime translated to delayed shipments and potential customer losses that could affect everyone's job security. "What exactly do you mean by crisis management experience?" Janet asked, her voice carrying the careful tone of someone willing to consider unconventional solutions while maintaining professional skepticism. Marcus glanced around the warehouse, noting the specific inefficiencies that manual processes could address. "I've worked with distribution networks during system failures before. There are ways to maintain operations using paper-based tracking and strategic workflow modification." Rick's expression had hardened into open suspicion, his authority challenged by a subordinate who claimed expertise in areas supposedly beyond his capabilities. How exactly would a warehouse picker know anything about crisis management protocols? He demanded, his voice carrying the sharp edge of someone whose assumptions were being threatened. Marcus recognized the moment of truth that had been building since his first day under Rick's scrutiny. He could retreat into vague responses and maintain his humble facade, or he could reveal enough capability to address the crisis while risking complete exposure of his background. "I have some experience with supply chain operations," Marcus replied carefully. "I understand how distribution systems work and how to maintain functionality during technical disruptions." The measured response revealed knowledge without fully disclosing his consulting background, but Rick's suspicion was clearly aroused. Janet, however, was focused on practical concerns rather than personal curiosity. The system outage had already cost them 2 hours of productivity, and conventional solutions weren't working. "What would you recommend?" Janet asked, her professional pragmatism overriding questions about Marcus's unexpected expertise. Marcus moved to a whiteboard near Janet's desk, picking up a marker with the confidence of someone accustomed to presenting solutions to complex problems. He began sketching a warehouse layout from memory, his movements precise and purposeful as he outlined areas and workflow patterns. "First, we need to establish manual tracking zones," he said, his voice taking on the authoritative tone that had once characterized his client presentations. "Divide the warehouse into sections with designated coordinators who can maintain paper-based pick lists and inventory counts." His marker moved across the whiteboard with practiced efficiency, creating a visual representation of the warehouse that included details no ordinary picker should know. Zone boundaries, optimal routing patterns, bottleneck locations that required special attention during manual operations. Rick watched with growing alarm as Marcus demonstrated familiarity with warehouse operations that extended far beyond his assigned responsibilities. The diagram revealed understanding of logistics principles that typically required specialized education and significant experience. "How do you know the warehouse layout in such detail?" Rick interrupted, his voice sharp with suspicion and underlying concern about implications he didn't yet fully understand. Marcus paused, marker still in hand, recognizing that his next words would determine whether the crisis response succeeded or whether his offer of assistance would be rejected due to Rick's personal animosity. "I pay attention to how the operation works," Marcus replied simply. 6 months of picking gives you perspective on workflow patterns and efficiency opportunities. The explanation was technically accurate while avoiding complete disclosure of his consulting background. Marcus returned to the whiteboard, outlining specific procedures for maintaining order fulfillment during system downtime. Each zone coordinator needs predetermined pick lists organized by priority and customer requirements, he continued, his expertise evident in the detailed specifications he provided. "We can use portable radios for communication between zones and establish checkpoints for quality verification without electronic scanners." Janet listened with growing appreciation for the practical solutions Marcus was providing. His recommendations addressed specific problems she had been struggling with while providing clear implementation steps that could be executed immediately. "This could actually work," she said, studying the whiteboard diagram with professional admiration. "How long would it take to establish these manual processes?" Marcus calculated implementation time based on available personnel and organizational requirements. "About 30 minutes to set up the initial structure, then continuous operation until the electronic systems are restored. We could maintain roughly 70% of normal productivity using these methods." The precise estimate revealed analytical capability that no ordinary warehouse picker should possess, but Janet was focused on solutions rather than sources. Rick, however, was becoming increasingly agitated by Marcus's demonstration of expertise that challenged fundamental assumptions about worker capabilities and background. "This is highly irregular," Rick protested. "We can't reorganize warehouse operations based on suggestions from someone whose own performance has been consistently substandard." The objection revealed Rick's inability to separate personal conflict from operational necessity. Marcus's picking speed had no bearing on his understanding of logistics principles, but Rick's ego couldn't accept assistance from someone he had been criticizing. Janet faced a choice between Rick's authority and Marcus's practical solutions. The continuing system outage made the decision urgent, with every additional minute of delay affecting customer satisfaction and company revenue. "We need to try something," Janet decided, her professional judgment overriding hierarchical concerns. "Marcus, can you help coordinate the implementation of these procedures?" Marcus nodded, understanding that accepting the coordination role would permanently alter his position in the warehouse hierarchy. He could no longer hide behind the facade of simple picker once he demonstrated capability to manage complex operational challenges. Rick's face flushed with anger and embarrassment as his authority was effectively superseded by someone he had been trying to terminate for poor performance. The reversal challenged not just his immediate plans but his fundamental assumptions about worker capabilities and management prerogatives. "I strongly object to this irregular procedure," Rick announced formally. "This man lacks the authority and qualifications to coordinate warehouse operations during a crisis." Janet turned to face Rick directly, her expression reflecting the tension between diplomatic management and operational necessity. "With respect, Rick, we need solutions right now. Marcus has provided specific recommendations that address our immediate problems. We can discuss procedural questions after we resolve the crisis." The confrontation between Janet and Rick created a moment of suspended tension while Marcus waited to learn whether his offer of assistance would be accepted or rejected. The warehouse around them continued its chaotic stagnation, workers standing idle while customer orders accumulated in digital purgatory. Marcus realized that regardless of the immediate decision, he had already crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. His demonstration of expertise had revealed capabilities that raised questions about his background and motivations for accepting warehouse work. The crisis had become a catalyst for transformation, forcing him to choose between continued invisibility and the risk of recognition that could change everything for better or worse. As Janet and Rick faced off over his unexpected offer of assistance, Marcus understood that the next few minutes would determine not just the warehouse's operational future but his own journey from hidden expert to acknowledged leader. Janet's decision came with the swift authority of someone accustomed to making critical choices under pressure. "We're implementing Marcus's recommendations immediately," she announced, her voice cutting through the warehouse tension with professional finality. "Rick, I need you to help coordinate communication with the shipping department while we establish manual operations." The assignment was diplomatic but firm, giving Rick a role while effectively placing Marcus in charge of the operational response. Rick's face registered the implications clearly, his temporary authority challenged by circumstances that revealed the limitations of criticism-based management. Marcus felt the familiar surge of energy that came with engaging complex problems requiring systematic solutions. 6 months of hiding his capabilities had been preparation for this moment when expertise could be applied openly without pretense or concealment. "I'll need team leaders for each zone," Marcus said, his voice carrying the natural authority that had once characterized his client presentations. "Jake, you know the electronics section better than anyone. Can you coordinate Zone A?" Jake Morrison's eyes widened at being addressed directly by Marcus, whose transformation from criticized picker to crisis coordinator had happened so quickly that adaptation required conscious effort. "Yeah, I can handle electronics," he replied, his usual casual confidence tempered by awareness that familiar dynamics had shifted dramatically. Marcus continued organizing personnel assignments with the efficiency of someone who understood both individual capabilities and operational requirements. "Sarah, you're excellent with the pharmaceutical picks. Can you manage Zone B using manual verification protocols?" Each assignment revealed Marcus's detailed knowledge of worker strengths and warehouse geography, information that supposedly slow pickers shouldn't possess. His recommendations were based on months of careful observation that had gone unnoticed while Rick focused exclusively on pick rate metrics. Within 20 minutes, the warehouse had been transformed from chaotic stagnation to organized manual operation. Marcus had established communication protocols, verification procedures, and quality control checkpoints that maintained accuracy while enabling continued productivity despite electronic system failure. Rick watched the transformation with growing unease, his temporary supervisory role reduced to messenger duties while Marcus effectively managed the crisis response. The efficient coordination revealed capabilities that challenged every assumption Rick had made about worker qualifications and background. The manual operation functioned with surprising effectiveness, workers adapting quickly to paper-based procedures that maintained most electronic system benefits through careful organization and communication. Pick lists were distributed systematically, inventory tracking continued through manual logging, and quality verification proceeded through visual inspection protocols. Marcus moved through the warehouse zones like a conductor orchestrating complex symphony, adjusting procedures in real time as challenges emerged and solutions required refinement. His years of consulting experience had taught him that crisis management required constant adaptation rather than rigid adherence to predetermined plans. At 4:15, with manual operations running smoothly and customer orders flowing toward shipping despite continued system outage, Janet approached Marcus at his improvised coordination station near the whiteboard where his diagrams had become operational blueprints. "This is remarkable," she said, her voice carrying genuine admiration for the transformation Marcus had engineered. "How did you learn to coordinate operations like this?" Marcus paused in his review of zone productivity reports, recognizing that Janet's question required a response that balanced honesty with discretion. He had revealed enough expertise to manage the crisis effectively, but complete disclosure of his consulting background might create new complications. "I've always been interested in how systems work," he replied carefully. "You learn a lot about efficiency and organization when you pay attention to operational patterns." The explanation was accurate while avoiding specific details about his educational background and professional experience. Janet seemed satisfied with the response, her focus remaining on practical concerns rather than personal curiosity. Rick, however, had been observing Marcus's coordination efforts with growing suspicion and mounting anger. The successful crisis response undermined his criticism of Marcus's capabilities while revealing his own limitations as a manager during challenging situations. At 4:30, Rick confronted Marcus directly at the coordination station, his voice tight with frustration and wounded authority. "I want to know exactly what your background is, Chen. Nobody learns crisis management by picking items from shelves." The challenge was delivered loudly enough to attract attention from nearby workers, creating the kind of public confrontation that Rick had used earlier to embarrass Marcus. Now, however, the dynamic had shifted completely. Marcus looked up from his productivity reports, meeting Rick's gaze with the calm confidence that crisis management had restored to his demeanor. "I have some experience with logistics and supply chain operations," he said simply. Sometimes background knowledge becomes relevant when circumstances require it. The measured response revealed competence without aggression, capability without arrogance. Marcus had learned during his consulting years that expertise spoke for itself when properly applied, requiring no defensive explanations or elaborate justifications. Rick's frustration mounted at Marcus's refusal to provide the detailed background information that might justify his earlier criticism. The successful crisis coordination had made Rick's performance complaints appear petty and uninformed, damaging his credibility with both Janet and the warehouse workers. "That's not an adequate explanation," Rick insisted, his voice rising with each word. "I demand to know what qualifications you have for coordinating warehouse operations during a crisis." The confrontation drew the attention of workers throughout the nearby zones, creating an audience for what had become a direct challenge to Rick's authority. Marcus recognized the moment as similar to corporate situations where threatened managers attempted to reassert dominance through aggressive confrontation. Janet intervened before Marcus could respond, her voice carrying the firm authority of someone who had witnessed enough. "Rick, we can discuss background questions after we complete the crisis response. Right now, Marcus's coordination is keeping us operational during a serious technical failure." The intervention protected Marcus from further harassment while acknowledging his valuable contribution to the warehouse operation. Rick's face registered the implications clearly, understanding that his criticism of Marcus had been publicly undermined by demonstrated competence during actual crisis conditions. As the afternoon progressed, word spread through the warehouse about Marcus's transformation from criticized picker to effective crisis coordinator. Workers who had witnessed Rick's earlier harassment now saw Marcus in a completely different light, recognizing capabilities that had been hidden beneath months of humble compliance. Jake Morrison approached Marcus during a brief break in coordination duties, his expression mixing admiration with curiosity. "Man, where did you learn to do all this?" he asked quietly. "You've completely organized this whole operation like you've done it before." Marcus appreciated Jake's support while recognizing that questions about his background would continue multiplying as his demonstrated expertise became widely known. The crisis had forced revelation of capabilities that couldn't be easily concealed again. By 5 o'clock, the manual operation was functioning so effectively that productivity had reached 80% of normal levels despite complete electronic system failure. Customer orders continued flowing toward shipping, inventory accuracy remained high, and worker morale had improved significantly through clear organization and purposeful activity. Marcus reviewed the day's accomplishments with quiet satisfaction, understanding that he had successfully applied his consulting expertise to help colleagues and customers while maintaining employment stability for everyone in the warehouse. The crisis had become an opportunity to demonstrate value without completely exposing his background. As his shift ended, Marcus gathered his personal belongings while noting how dramatically the warehouse atmosphere had changed. Workers who had seemed distant during months of Rick's criticism now offered appreciation for his coordination efforts, recognizing leadership qualities that efficient crisis management had revealed. The transformation was irreversible, but Marcus felt confident that he had managed the revelation carefully enough to avoid the negative consequences that complete disclosure might bring. Tomorrow would determine whether his demonstrated capabilities would be valued or whether Rick's threatened authority would seek new ways to reassert dominance over someone who had publicly undermined his assumptions about worker qualifications and management prerogatives. The next morning arrived with the weight of unfinished business hanging over the warehouse like storm clouds gathering before lightning strikes. The electronic systems had been restored overnight, but the efficiency improvements Marcus had demonstrated through manual coordination remained visible in workflow patterns that continued operating with enhanced precision. Marcus clocked in at 7 o'clock to find Rick waiting near the monitoring station, his expensive boots polished and his clipboard thick with what appeared to be research documents. The temporary supervisor's demeanor carried new intensity, suggesting that overnight hours had been spent investigating rather than resting. Janet Rodriguez appeared unusually tense as she unlocked the pharmaceutical cage, her glance toward Rick's station suggesting concern about developments beyond normal operational oversight. The success of yesterday's crisis response had created undercurrents of tension that threatened to surface in unpredictable ways. "Chen, report to the monitoring station immediately," Rick announced, his voice carrying across the warehouse with unmistakable authority. His tone suggested that preliminary investigations had yielded information that would change their professional relationship dramatically. Marcus approached the monitoring station with calm awareness that yesterday's revelation of expertise had initiated consequences that could no longer be controlled or concealed. Rick's overnight research had likely uncovered elements of his background that would require direct confrontation rather than diplomatic deflection. "I've been making some inquiries about your background," Rick began, consulting his research documents with the satisfaction of someone who had discovered contradictory evidence. "It's interesting what you can learn about people when you know where to look." The statement carried implied threat while revealing that Rick had used his corporate resources to investigate an employee whose only offense had been effective crisis management. Marcus recognized the familiar pattern of threatened authority seeking ammunition for personal vindication rather than operational improvement. "According to my research," Rick continued, his voice rising with each revelation, "you're Marcus Chen, former senior consultant at Davidson & Associates. MBA from Northwestern, specializing in supply chain optimization for Fortune 500 companies. Annual salary in the low six figures before your departure 18 months ago." The biographical details hung in the warehouse air like accusations, drawing attention from nearby workers who had begun gathering to witness what appeared to be a formal confrontation. Marcus felt exposed but not ashamed, his corporate background representing achievement rather than deception. "So my question is this," Rick announced loudly enough to ensure maximum audience participation, "why is a former Fortune 500 consultant working as a warehouse picker for $12 an hour? What happened that forced you to take such a dramatic step down in employment status?" The public interrogation was designed to humiliate through exposure of perceived failure, but Marcus recognized Rick's fundamental misunderstanding of employment transitions and personal priorities. Corporate success measured in salary and status had little relevance to current circumstances that prioritized stability and family security. Personal circumstances led me to seek different employment opportunities, Marcus replied with quiet dignity that refused to characterize warehouse work as beneath his qualifications or experience. This position provides steady income and health insurance while allowing me to focus on family responsibilities. Rick's expression suggested disappointment that Marcus hadn't shown embarrassment or defensive anger about his employment transition. The revelation of consulting background was meant to expose hypocrisy or failure, not elicit calm acceptance of changed circumstances. But instead of honesty about your qualifications, Rick pressed, his frustration mounting, you chose to hide your background and work below your capabilities. That suggests either deception about your reasons for being here or problems that forced you out of corporate consulting. The accusation revealed Rick's inability to understand employment decisions based on personal values rather than status maximization. Marcus's choice to prioritize Emma's security over career advancement represented wisdom that Rick's corporate mindset couldn't appreciate. Jake Morrison stepped forward from the gathering crowd of workers, his voice carrying unexpected authority as he addressed Rick directly. Marcus has been honest about his work quality and dedication for 6 months. His background doesn't change the fact that he's been reliable and helpful to everyone here. The defense from a coworker shifted the confrontation dynamic, transforming Rick's personal attack into a broader question about respect for all warehouse employees regardless of their previous experience or current circumstances. This isn't about work quality, Rick shot back, his voice revealing anger that employee support was undermining his authority. This is about deception and misrepresentation. Chen has been operating under false pretenses since his first day here. Marcus recognized the moment when diplomatic responses would no longer suffice, when Rick's escalating accusations required direct confrontation rather than continued deflection. The time for hiding capabilities had ended, replaced by necessity for complete honesty about qualifications and motivations. I haven't deceived anyone about my work performance or dedication, Marcus said, his voice carrying the professional authority that crisis management had restored to his demeanor. My background is relevant only when it can help solve problems or improve operations for everyone's benefit. The response acknowledged his consulting expertise while reframing it as resource rather than liability, capability that enhanced rather than threatened warehouse operations. Marcus had learned during his corporate years that credentials meant nothing without demonstrated ability to apply knowledge effectively. Janet Rodriguez approached the confrontation with visible concern about workplace disruption and employee morale. Both of you need to step back from this personal conflict, she said firmly. Marcus's background doesn't affect his current job performance or his right to work here without harassment. Rick's face flushed with frustrated authority as Janet's intervention protected Marcus from further interrogation while implicitly criticizing Rick's confrontational approach to employee management. The temporary supervisor had overplayed his hand, creating sympathy for Marcus while revealing his own limitations as a leader. Yesterday's crisis response proved that Marcus's expertise benefits everyone here, Janet continued, her voice growing stronger as she addressed the assembled workers. Hidden qualifications that emerge during genuine need should be celebrated rather than criticized. The validation from warehouse management transformed the confrontation completely, turning Rick's attempted exposure into recognition of Marcus's valuable contribution. Workers who had gathered expecting to witness humiliation instead saw affirmation of their colleagues' worth and capabilities. You're making a serious mistake, Rick warned Janet, his voice tight with anger at losing control of the situation. This man has demonstrated that he's been deceptive about his qualifications and motivations from day one. Marcus stepped forward, understanding that Rick's escalating accusations required final clarification rather than continued defensive responses. My motivation has always been providing for my daughter while doing honest work with integrity. Corporate consulting and warehouse picking both serve that purpose when approached with dedication and respect for others. The simple statement of values cut through Rick's complex accusations with clarity that resonated throughout the watching crowd. Marcus had revealed not just his qualifications but his character, demonstrating that true worth transcended job titles or salary levels. What experiences have shaped your understanding of what really matters in work and life? Sometimes our greatest challenges reveal strengths we didn't know we possessed. How do you measure success beyond titles and paychecks? Rick stood isolated by his own aggressive confrontation, his authority undermined by employee support for Marcus and management protection of workplace dignity. The investigation that was meant to expose deception had instead revealed dedication. The background check intended to justify termination had demonstrated value that enhanced rather than threatened operations. As the crowd dispersed to begin their shifts, Marcus understood that his transformation from hidden consultant to acknowledged expert was complete. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but today had established that expertise applied with humility and integrity would always find recognition among people who valued substance over appearance. The tension that had been building for days reached its breaking point when Rick made his final, devastating mistake. Frustrated by his loss of authority and Janet's protection of Marcus, he decided to escalate beyond warehouse politics to corporate intervention. At 10:30, Rick retreated to Janet's office and closed the door for what appeared to be an urgent phone conversation. Marcus continued his assigned picks in the general merchandise section, aware that Rick's investigation had changed workplace dynamics permanently but uncertain about what consequences would follow. The other workers treated him with new respect tinged with curiosity, their conversations mixing admiration for his crisis management with questions about his corporate background. 20 minutes later, Rick emerged from the office with renewed confidence, his expression suggesting that corporate reinforcement was arriving to support his position. He approached Marcus with the satisfied demeanor of someone who had secured decisive advantage in a prolonged conflict. "I've contacted the regional director about your situation," Rick announced loudly enough to ensure nearby workers could hear the confrontation. "Corporate needs to review how someone with your background ended up in this position and whether there are liability issues involved." The threat was clear despite its corporate language. Rick was attempting to transform Marcus's revealed expertise into a personnel problem that would justify termination while protecting his own authority from further challenge. Marcus recognized the escalation tactic from his consulting years, when threatened managers would appeal to higher authority rather than address operational issues directly. Rick's call to corporate was designed to bypass Janet's protection and create pressure that would force Marcus's departure. At 11:15, a black sedan pulled into the warehouse parking lot, followed by a second vehicle that suggested corporate arrival rather than routine business. Through the high windows, Marcus could see figures in expensive suits gathering near the building entrance, their posture suggesting serious business rather than casual oversight. Janet appeared increasingly tense as she received internal phone calls that required her immediate attention. Her glances toward Marcus carried concern mixed with reassurance, suggesting that corporate involvement might have unexpected implications beyond Rick's intended outcome. The warehouse atmosphere grew electric with anticipation as word spread that corporate executives were conducting an unscheduled inspection. Workers continued their assigned tasks with heightened awareness that their performance was being evaluated at levels far above normal supervisory oversight. At 11:45, the warehouse doors opened to admit three figures in tailored business attire, their movements suggesting authority and purpose that commanded immediate attention. Janet hurried forward to greet them, her professional demeanor masking obvious concern about unscheduled corporate intervention. Rick positioned himself prominently near the monitoring station, clearly expecting vindication and support for his personnel concerns. His clipboard was ready with documentation that would justify his criticism of Marcus while demonstrating his own managerial effectiveness. The lead executive was a distinguished man in his 50s with silver hair and familiar expensive boots that Marcus suddenly recognized with growing alarm. The temporary supervisor who had been harassing him for days was actually someone far more important than he had claimed, someone whose authority extended throughout the entire corporate hierarchy. "Ladies and gentlemen," the executive announced to the assembled warehouse staff, his voice carrying natural authority that filled the vast space effortlessly. "I'm Richard Vaughn, CEO of Apex Distribution. I've been working here undercover for the past week to evaluate our operational efficiency and management practices." The revelation struck the warehouse like lightning, transforming every interaction of the past week into corporate theater that had been conducted without the workers' knowledge. Rick, the temporary supervisor, was actually the company's chief executive, whose criticism and demands had been testing rather than training. Marcus felt the ground shift beneath him as implications cascaded through his understanding of recent events. The man who had been threatening his employment was the ultimate authority over everyone's job security, whose evaluation would determine not just individual careers but the warehouse's entire future. I came here because our productivity metrics suggested efficiency problems that required direct observation, Vaughn continued, his gaze moving across the workers with calculating assessment. What I discovered was far more complex than simple performance issues. The CEO's attention settled on Marcus with an intensity that suggested personal recognition despite their supposed first meeting. Marcus realized that Vaughn's investigation had likely uncovered his consulting background before Rick's confrontational revelation, creating corporate awareness that explained the timing of this dramatic disclosure. Yesterday's system crisis provided an excellent opportunity to observe authentic leadership under pressure, Vaughn announced, his voice gaining strength as he addressed the broader workforce. The response revealed capabilities that traditional performance metrics completely failed to identify. Marcus understood that the crisis management demonstration had been evaluated at levels far beyond warehouse operations. His coordination of manual procedures had showcased exactly the kind of systems thinking that corporate leadership valued, regardless of his current employment status. Marcus Chen, step forward please, Vaughn commanded, his voice carrying authority that made compliance automatic rather than optional. Marcus approached the CEO with calm dignity despite internal turbulence, recognizing that his corporate consulting experience had prepared him for exactly this kind of high-stakes professional evaluation. Years of client presentations provided confidence that expertise would speak for itself when properly demonstrated. Your crisis coordination yesterday was exceptional, Vaughn said, his voice carrying genuine admiration that surprised everyone present. The manual procedures you implemented maintained 80% productivity during complete system failure. That level of operational knowledge doesn't develop through warehouse picking experience alone. The acknowledgement of expertise felt surreal after days of criticism about slow performance and inadequate productivity. Marcus had been evaluated by the company's highest authority without knowing his true identity, his capabilities recognized despite Rick's systematic harassment. I understand you have extensive background in supply chain consulting, Vaughn continued, consulting notes that suggested thorough investigation beyond Rick's superficial research. Northwestern MBA, senior consultant at Davidson & Associates, specializing in exactly the kind of operational optimization that our facilities require. Marcus nodded, understanding that complete disclosure was unavoidable given Vaughn's comprehensive knowledge of his background. Yes, sir. I transitioned to warehouse work for personal reasons involving family responsibilities and employment stability. Vaughn's expression suggested understanding rather than judgment about Marcus's career transition. Sometimes the best talent ends up in unexpected places for entirely valid reasons, he said. The question is whether we're intelligent enough to recognize and utilize that talent effectively. The statement carried implicit criticism of management practices that failed to identify valuable employees, suggesting that Rick's confrontational approach had revealed more about supervisory limitations than worker deficiencies. Marcus Chen, Vaughn announced formally, I'm offering you the position of Regional Operations Consultant, reporting directly to corporate headquarters. Your demonstrated expertise in crisis management and supply chain optimization would benefit our entire distribution network. The offer hung in the warehouse air like transformation itself, converting months of hidden capability into acknowledged expertise with corporate authority and appropriate compensation. Marcus felt the weight of vindication after enduring criticism that had questioned his fundamental worth and competence. If this story has touched your heart, let us know where you're listening from and subscribe for more inspiring stories about hidden talents and second chances. Sometimes our greatest challenges become the foundation for our most meaningful opportunities. As Marcus considered the life-changing opportunity that had emerged from workplace adversity, he understood that Emma's faith in his abilities had been justified completely. The warehouse experience had tested his character while providing the foundation for professional recognition that honored both his expertise and his values. Marcus stood before the CEO with the quiet dignity that had sustained him through months of hidden struggle, understanding that this moment represented more than professional vindication. Emma's face appeared in his mind, her confident assertion that he was the smartest daddy in the world finally receiving the recognition it had always deserved. The warehouse around them had fallen into absolute silence as workers processed the dramatic revelation that their temporary supervisor was actually the company's chief executive. Months of assumed hierarchy had been overturned in minutes, revealing that the most criticized employee possessed expertise that corporate leadership desperately needed. "Mr. Vaughn," Marcus began, his voice carrying the professional composure that consulting experience had taught him to maintain during crucial negotiations. "I'm honored by your offer, but I need to consider how this change would affect my primary responsibility, which is providing stability for my 80-year-old daughter." The response surprised Vaughn, who had expected immediate acceptance of such a significant opportunity. Most professionals would have seized the chance for career restoration without hesitation, but Marcus's priority remained unchanged despite corporate recognition. "Your daughter's well-being is obviously your primary concern," Vaughn replied, his tone reflecting respect for Marcus's values rather than disappointment at conditional acceptance. "What would you need to make this transition work for your family?" Marcus appreciated the CEO's willingness to discuss practical concerns rather than demanding immediate commitment. The consulting position would require travel and potentially relocation, factors that could disrupt Emma's educational stability and emotional security. "The position would need to accommodate school schedules and minimize travel that would take me away from home overnight," Marcus explained. "My daughter has already experienced significant upheaval in her young life. Any career change must prioritize her continued stability and happiness." Vaughn nodded thoughtfully, clearly recognizing that Marcus's negotiation revealed character traits that made him even more valuable as a potential employee. Leaders who prioritized family responsibility over personal advancement typically brought the same integrity to professional challenges. "We can structure the role as regional coordinator based from this facility," Vaughn offered. "Most consultation work can be conducted remotely, with day travel limited to monthly site visits that respect your family commitments." The modified offer addressed Marcus's primary concerns while providing the career restoration that his expertise deserved. Regional coordination would allow him to remain near Emma while applying his consulting capabilities to benefit multiple distribution centers throughout the network. Janet Rodriguez stepped forward, her expression mixing pride with concern about losing such a valuable team member. "Marcus has been an exceptional employee here," she said. "We would hate to lose him, but this opportunity clearly matches his qualifications and experience." Her endorsement carried weight with Vaughn while demonstrating the respect Marcus had earned through months of dedicated warehouse service. Janet's support reinforced that his character had been consistently evident to anyone willing to look beyond superficial performance metrics. "Actually," Vaughn replied, his expression suggesting that comprehensive planning had already considered multiple scenarios, "the regional coordinator would maintain close connection with this facility while improving operations throughout our distribution network." Marcus would be enhancing rather than leaving the team that recognized his worth. The solution addressed everyone's concerns while acknowledging that Marcus's transformation had been supported by colleagues who valued integrity over productivity statistics. His success would benefit the entire warehouse community that had witnessed his journey from criticized picker to recognized expert. Marcus looked around the warehouse at faces that had become familiar over 6 months of shared work and mutual respect. Jake Morrison offered an encouraging thumbs up, understanding that Marcus's advancement represented validation for all employees whose true capabilities might be hidden beneath routine job responsibilities. "I accept your offer, Mr. Vaughn," Marcus said formally, his voice carrying gratitude mixed with determination to justify the confidence being placed in his abilities. "I look forward to applying my experience to benefit Apex Distribution while maintaining my commitment to family and community." The acceptance drew spontaneous applause from the warehouse workers, their celebration reflecting genuine happiness for a colleague whose quiet dignity had earned universal respect. Marcus's vindication represented hope that dedication and integrity would eventually receive appropriate recognition. Vaughn extended his hand for a firm handshake that symbolized mutual respect between professionals who understood the value of authentic leadership. "Your crisis management yesterday demonstrated exactly the kind of practical expertise our operations require," he said. "I expect significant improvements throughout our distribution network under your guidance." As the formal ceremony concluded and workers returned to their assignments, Marcus realized that Emma's unwavering faith in his abilities had been prophetic rather than naive. Her confidence that he would figure things out had sustained him through months when corporate recognition seemed impossible. That evening, Marcus arrived home to find Emma arranging her completed solar system project on the kitchen table, each planet positioned with the same methodical precision that had characterized his warehouse work. The wire rings around Saturn caught the light beautifully, testament to her belief that excellence required patience and attention to detail. "Daddy, how was work today?" she asked, looking up from her careful arrangement of planetary models with the same bright curiosity that made every day meaningful. Marcus settled beside her, studying the perfect proportions and accurate distances that demonstrated her commitment to scientific precision. "Today was very interesting, sweetheart. I received a promotion that will let me use more of my skills to help people while still being home with you every evening." Emma's face lit up with the pure joy of someone who had never doubted that her father's worth would eventually be recognized. "I knew good things would happen," she said with complete confidence. "You always figure out the right way to solve problems." Her faith reminded Marcus that the most important validation had always come from home, where his dedication was appreciated regardless of corporate titles or salary levels. The consulting position represented opportunity rather than redemption, advancement rather than rescue from inadequate circumstances. As they worked together preparing dinner, Marcus reflected on the journey that had led from corporate success through personal crisis to warehouse work and finally to professional recognition that honored both his expertise and his values. Each phase had contributed essential lessons about resilience, dignity, and the true meaning of success. The warehouse experience had taught him that honest work performed with integrity possessed its own inherent worth, regardless of external recognition or financial compensation. His colleagues had demonstrated that respect was earned through character rather than credentials, through daily dedication rather than impressive resumes. Emma's homework that evening included a writing assignment about heroes in everyday life. She chose to write about her father, describing how he helped sick people get their medicines safely while always being patient and kind to everyone around him. Her essay concluded that heroes weren't defined by special powers but by choosing to do the right thing even when it was difficult. Marcus helped her review the essay, recognizing in her words the values that had guided his choices throughout the challenging months. Emma understood that heroism meant consistent integrity rather than dramatic gestures, daily dedication rather than occasional brilliance. As he tucked Emma into bed, she looked up at him with serious eyes that held wisdom beyond her years. "Daddy, I'm proud of you for being so good at your job. But I was already proud of you just for being my daddy." Her words captured the essential truth that Marcus had learned through corporate loss and warehouse discovery. Professional success measured in titles and compensation was meaningful only when built upon the foundation of character and values that defined authentic worth. The promotion to regional consultant represented opportunity to apply expertise in service of others while maintaining the family stability that had always been his primary objective. Emma's faith in his abilities had been vindicated, but more importantly, his faith in the value of persistent integrity had been rewarded. Marcus fell asleep that night understanding that tomorrow would bring new challenges and responsibilities, but also the satisfaction of work that honored both his capabilities and his commitment to being the father Emma deserved. The journey from corporate consultant to warehouse picker to regional coordinator had revealed that true success was measured not by external recognition but by the ability to provide love, stability, and moral example for the people who mattered most.